Welcome back to Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have on for the entire hour. We've kidnapped him. It is our friend Thom Hartmann, who you know from the Hartmann program on this very channel from noon to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. New York Times bestselling author, and of course, his Substack, The Hartmann Report, which I subscribe to. I can't recommend enough. HartmannReport.com. Sign up. It's free. It's great articles. You learn every day, and every time the word Ronald Reagan is in an article, you got to drink. That's how it works. So, Thom, nice to see you, my friend.
Hey, Dean, great to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So it is, Thom, let's just start out. There are so many red alarms. I was on vacation last week and I spent the time reading, like most people at the pool, about fascism. Everyone's there sitting there reading their books about romance novels and comedic biographies. And I'm reading Timothy Snyder's on tyranny and also about the Gilded Age, because that's where we also have the oligarchs now.
Yep.
And, we find out a short time ago, FBI Director Christopher Wray has done what Trump wanted. He's not going to fight him. I mean, he could be fired. It's not like he could stop it, but he's obeying in advance. And now it just allows Trump to have that runway to turn the FBI and Kash Patel sitting around how he's going to do this even quicker. So what's your reaction to that? And what are your concerns about what we're seeing here?
I don't think we can blame what's coming on Christopher Wray.
No, all right.
My take on this is not so much that he's trying to bow to Trump or kiss his butt or anything like that. It's just he's trying to save himself the embarrassment of being fired, and that's easy to understand. I mean, just as a human being, I've not been a huge fan of Christopher Wray. He was a Trump appointee in the first place, but he, the FBI has done a really good job of tracking down the January 6th people. The word did not come down from the top. I mean, he works for Merrick Garland essentially, and so he was never really told to go after, or at least not initially, to go after the leadership, which would include Trump and all of the fascists around him. But I share your concern, Dean. I really think that what we're looking at here is the very real probability, not just a possibility. I mean, he's going to have considerable power. That Donald Trump is going to turn the FBI into his own Stasi, that to use your phrase. And I don't know if you caught my op-ed today, but it kind of goes with your take on this, which is that I don't think that Trump's pardons of the January 6th murderers, we've got to stop calling them rioters. It wasn't a riot. And they did kill 3 police officers and 5 civilians. I don't think that his pardoning of these people is just a thank you or just a fulfilling a campaign promise. I agree with Joyce Vance. I think he's reaching out to the Proud Boys and the 3%ers and all the other militias out there, and all the Ted Kaczynski types, the lone wolf stochastic terrorism guys, and saying, if you commit crimes on my behalf, I've got your back. You can commit murder. These people committed murder, or at least manslaughter. You can bomb places. You can do what you want. I've got your back. You're not going to get prosecuted, and that's very, very troubling. I mean, these people are on a recruiting jag right now. These militias, and they're all using Trump as their principal recruiting tool. Join the Trump revolution, as it were. So I'm very concerned about this.
Me too. And that point that Joyce Vance made, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, as an expert on authoritarianism, has been making it everywhere on my show and other places for over a year. I interviewed her for Salon.com, and I even quoted her in articles that the pardons were not to tell people, hey, thank you. They were to incentivize future conduct. And so I'm glad Joyce Vance sees it now, but Ruth Ben-Ghiat's been talking about that for over a year and saying authoritarian dictators use pardons, or even if it doesn't have to be a pardon, get out of jail if you've helped me out, as a currency to get people to do things. And that's exactly what he's doing. So that's very true. And there were, something else deeply concerning, and I wrote it in an article, and it's Timothy Snyder in his book On Tyranny, where he quotes from a German Jewish publication. And this publication wrote this article just days after Hitler comes to power in January 1933. And I'll read a little. And why I talked about it on my show a few days ago and wrote it in my article is it was so jarring. And I feel so many people subscribe to this, unfortunately, now. And they wrote, we do not subscribe to the view that Mr. Hitler and his friends, now finally in possession of the power they've long desired, will implement the proposals circulating in Nazi newspapers. They will not suddenly deprive German Jews of their constitutional rights, nor enclose them in ghettos, nor subject them to the jealous and murderous impulse of the mob. They cannot do this, and they went on to say, because there's checks and balances, and because they believe Hitler would reflect upon one's better self as a European leader. And everything they put in there, Hitler literally did within months and then years.
And the New York Times, by the way, ran a similar article. Very, very. In fact, the first time I read that, I thought that was the New York Times piece, but the New York Times ran a piece in January of 33 saying the same thing.
So how do we? My goal is to wake people up, even on our side, who deep down in the darkest part of their, not in the dark part, but like deep down, they go, he's not really going to do what he said. I want them to know he's going to try everything. And the reason I want them to do that, because Timothy Snyder talked about in his book, that the fascists want you paralyzed by fear. They want, when the unthinkable comes, like you don't know what to do and you just submit. If we ready ourselves intellectually and emotionally for Trump doing exactly what he said, we will build coalitions today. And we won't be struck by fear then, because we're building the groundwork today. And that's my plea to our fellow Democrats and anyone who opposes Trump. So what is your sense of Trump being literal and that it is coming and it'll be worse than we actually imagine?
I agree with your analysis. I absolutely agree with your analysis. I think that the group that's probably going to be the most shocked about this is the media, because clearly they're taking that same perspective and did throughout the election. I mean, the only possible rationale that you can come up with for the media sane washing and normalizing Donald Trump is that they don't believe him. Because if they did, I mean, one of the things he was threatening to do was shut down the media. He was threatening to put these news organizations out of business. He's threatening to arrest and prosecute reporters and executives. If they took that seriously, I think they would have behaved quite differently. So we have to get ready. I would like to hear from the Biden administration. I would like to know what they are doing to try and harden our democracy. I would like to know how they recommend we respond to these things. I mean, the Democratic Party's leadership, we elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be president and vice president 4 years ago. And as such, we put an awful lot of trust. We basically put ourselves in their hands. And we haven't heard a peep out of them since the election about this issue, about what to do when Donald Trump tries to turn America into a fascist republic. And, I want to hear. And if they think that there's nothing to worry about, I want to know why. If they think that they've got things battened down and the hatches are secured, tell us how. I wouldn't be buying it in all probability, but I'd like to hear it. And if they don't think that everything's going to be fine, if they are concerned about the future, then they got some splaining to do.
I could not agree with you more. That's what my open of the show is about today in my Substack for tomorrow, because I wrote it today and that was my open. It'll be my Substack tomorrow. But it comes from listening to listeners calling in and going, where are they? They told us Trump's a fascist. He's a threat to our democracy. He's an existential threat. And then since the election, they're gone and there's a power vacuum and it's being filled by Trump and his voice. And they should be laying out something, anything. Instead, I mean, I had Ezra Levin on from Indivisible, and he was more useful than Joe Biden. He was saying what they're doing with Indivisible and how they're growing their chapters, they're building the community they need, and they're getting ready. And I'm looking to the grassroots leaders more than the elected leaders, because for whatever reason, and look, I believe everything they told us about Trump being a threat to our democracy, it rang true because it was true. We know it's true. The guy attempted a coup. They weren't just trying to get us to vote by saying that. So I don't know why they're not coming forward now and saying, except for Vice President Harris, the day after she lost, saying, I'm going to be there for the fight, and then disappearing.
And then she went to Hawaii for a couple of weeks. I get it, taking a week or two off to figure out what you're going to do and going forward and all that. And that was, Thanksgiving holidays, et cetera. But what I don't get is this silence. It's not helping the Democratic Party. It's not helping the cause. And frankly, it's not helping America. They should be speaking every single day. Everything that Trump does, every crackpot lunatic that he puts forward for his cabinet or for other positions, every step that is being telegraphed right now by Republicans in Congress, somebody needs to be speaking out against. And it shouldn't be, Ro Khanna in a 3-minute hit on CNN. It should be the president of the United States speaking to the Republic, It should be the Vice President of the United States talking to the press. It should be the senior members of his administration. I mean, Merrick Garland should be talking about the danger to the Justice Department. Chris Wray should be talking about the danger to the FBI. Lena Khan should be talking about the danger to the FTC. The head of the FCC, I'm spacing on his name, should be talking about that, about Brendan Carr and the danger he represents. We are not hearing this stuff, and it's being played like it's a normal transition. It's the normal, last holiday weeks of the last, month of an administration. And it's not normal. This is not a normal time. It's not a normal man coming in. It's not a normal administration coming in. These are not normal positions that they're taking. These are things that have never before been seen in the United States generally. I mean, we saw them in the Confederate States in the 1830s through 60s. You and I have talked about that before. Mm-hmm. We actually had a fascist region in the United States that operated under fascist rules. And in my opinion, that's what they're trying to reinvent. And in fact, one of them, it might have been Trump, but it was somebody who just today, I was quoting it on my show, said that talking about liberals and Democrats, saying that they are Confederates. It's like,
oh, that was, I saw that. Maybe it was Mark Levin or somebody, right? Someone on the right was saying about us.
Yeah, that we're Confederates, and sorry, the Confederates were fascists. We are with Lincoln, and it's just
it's almost like Tom. It's almost like Harris and the Democrats weren't beaten; they were like vanquished. They were destroyed. Like their spirit's been broken. It's a different thing. Like it doesn't make. I mean, that's the way they're internalizing. It seems like, because why wouldn't you be speaking out? Why? Right. And thankfully, you have people like Liz Warren still speaking out, and you have Jasmine Crockett and Eric Swalwell and a few. But what's missing is an organized message where, like, we're going to come out every day and we're going to pound you, and we're going to come here every day at noon or 1 o'clock in the House or wherever, and we're going to answer them, whatever it might be. It's just ad hoc. It's a few people here and there, and the rest are just gone. I don't know where they are. And so it's going to make people question, were you telling us Trump was that bad and he really wasn't? And we know he is. Or have you given up in the fight and you're just going to leave us be? I will say this, though, Tom, and I found it. I went back and I did research, and I did a very timed research of the news articles between November of 2016 to January of 2017. And what I noticed is the grassroots resistance to Trump. The resistance to Trump was built by the grassroots. It wasn't the elected officials. The Women's March was being talked about 2 weeks after the election, where these women said, we're going to try to do this march. I'm reading the articles about the origin of it. They we hope we get 90,000 people. They get 500,000 people. And the boycotting Trump's properties and products, and Indivisible comes to life, and other organizations that are grassroots. So I think once again, it's going to take us to drive the leaders to follow us. Like President Obama, when he said in 2008, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. We are the change we've been waiting for. That's the only thing that gives me hope, because the leaders aren't doing it. They're just silent.
Yeah, and when you go back to 2016 and you look at how Obama treated that, he didn't come out and warn us either. He didn't prepare us. He didn't set things up. Well, not so much he, but certainly Hillary Clinton have been saying this guy's a fascist, and she went silent too. And so it's like we're seeing a repeat of 2016 right now, and that was not a good one. And this is going to be a hell of a lot worse, given the cast of characters that he's bringing along with him. I would add, you said, where is the regular voices? I want to know where the leadership is. Why are we not hearing? Chuck Schumer just got reelected leader of the Senate, which is something that just makes me so sad. But okay, Chuck, you're in charge now. Come on out here and kick some ass. You have some things to say. Hakeem Jeffries, you've had leadership of the House of Representatives for a couple of years now. Show us what's up your sleeve. Show us what you're planning on doing. Give us some indication that you actually have some courage. Stand up to these people. I think that the two messages that people are taking away from this right now, and I think right to a large extent, this is kind of subliminal. It's kind of the gestalt, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. rather than being explicit. But I suspect that by January 5th or 6th or 7th, it's going to start getting explicit. But the two messages are the two messages that you just articulated, that the Biden administration has given up, or that the Trump administration is not going to be that bad, or both. And I vote for both. And these are terrible messages. These are terrible messages for America. They're terrible messages for the electorate. They're terrible messages for the ongoing vibrancy of the Democratic Party. They're terrible messages, frankly, for the Republican Party, because what they do is they empower people like Elon Musk to intimidate people like Joni Ernst. I mean, Elon Musk is now running ads that they're going to start, I guess, later this week or early next week in Joni Ernst's state, in Iowa, talking about how wonderful Pete Hegseth is. He's because she's up for re-election in 2 years, and this is a thinly veiled threat. We'll mobilize a primary challenge against you, and I guarantee you she's going to flip. And when you've got Elon Musk coming after you with his millions of dollars, I mean, he's already called out a couple of just mid-level government bureaucrats as examples of, this is what we shouldn't have, right? These people should be, out of government. And what happened? They get doxxed, they get harassed, they're having to move out of their houses. There's virtually no coverage of this, by the way, and that ain't nothing compared to what's coming down the road. So I'm very, very concerned, Dean.
I am, and I'm talking with our friend Thom Hartmann. So, Thom, let's shift gears. And you wrote articles about the healthcare industry. You've been writing forever, but I want to get your reaction to what we're seeing, almost this folk hero status of Luigi after the shooting. I mean, even Jimmy Kimmel was talking about it on his show last night, and people were cheering and laughing. And it's from a dark incident. He assassinates Brian Thompson, the head of United Healthcare here in New York City, but it prompted less of discussion of the assassination and more of discussion about how bad health insurance companies are, UNH specifically, and then broadening out to others. Why do you think it struck such a nerve with people? And is there anything bigger in terms of the oligarchy that's in front of us?
Well, let me walk you through my logic on this, Dean.
Sure.
Who basically destroyed working class people in the 1920s and 30s?
Who did? Was it the big corporations, the trusts?
It was the banks. It was the banks.
Right.
And because in fact, I told the story on the air today. My mother's family in Charlevoix, her father's family. Her father died when she was 13, but her father's family was not rich, but they were wealthy, if you know what I mean. I mean, what you would call upper middle class today. And in the 20s, in 1929, when the banks went down, that money just vanished. I mean, my mother's family lost everything, and her father died shortly thereafter. And then her mother got a job as the town clerk in Charlevoix, and did that for the rest of her life. But my mom grew up on a very bottom of the middle class, because of that, and never forgot it. And so the banks had screwed America. It was hard to find a single family in America that hadn't been harmed by the banks. Now, question two. Wow. Who were the heroes? Who were the folk heroes of the 20s and 30s? What names come to mind?
John Dillinger.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Right. John Dillinger.
What did they do? They robbed banks.
Yep.
So surprise, surprise. What industry right now is bringing American families to their knees? What industry right now causes 500,000 bankruptcies a year? What industry right now is literally killing people? I had somebody call into my show today telling the story of his mother who was in the hospital, and she got a MRSA infection, and they wanted to keep her for another 2 weeks to deal with this MRSA infection, because MRSA will kill you. And a health insurance company refused to pay for it. So the hospital moved his mother into basically a residential facility, a recovery facility. And 3 days later, she was dead from MRSA.
Wow.
And it was United Healthcare that refused to pay for it, according to him. I mean, I can't verify all this.
No, I understand. Sure.
But I'm sure that, that was just one random caller today, and he's a regular caller. He's a solid guy. I'm sure that there's thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of stories like that in America. When you look at United Healthcare's got a 32% claims denial rate. And then this morning on NPR, I heard that 90% of claims that are appealed are overturned. The claims denials are overturned, which means that they shouldn't have been done in the first place. These are just companies that are just kicking you upside the head and saying you're going to do something, and 9 out of 10 people don't do anything. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that Luigi Mangione is being turned into a folk hero. He's the Bonnie and Clyde of this generation. And interestingly, Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger and Two Gun Crowley and Whitey, what's his name, all those guys, all those bank robbers back in the 20s and 30s, their activities in large part led to the creation of the FDIC and the agencies that heavily regulated banks. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And I realize that some people get very uncomfortable when I say this, because they're like, oh, you're taking a tragedy and trying to politicize it. BS. It's not outside the realm of possibility that this assassination is going to provoke the necessary conversation that our society needs to have, our country needs to have, about why are we the only friggin' country in the entire developed world that doesn't consider healthcare to be a right rather than just a privilege? Why are we the only developed country in the entire developed world that has 25 million uninsured people? Why in the 34 OECD countries, the wealthiest countries in the world, why is it that out of those 34 countries, there were 500,000 medical bankruptcies last year, and every single one of them happened here in the United States? These things should be at the top of the news. These should be being discussed. They're not. Instead, it's, let's talk about Brian Thompson's family, or, let's discover whether Luigi is mentally ill or not, or, how long was he able to hold out, or, anything but not, and why is that? Well, it could have something to do with the fact that we're just on December 7th, we just closed the Medicare Advantage enrollment period. And probably on that date, as of that date, the health insurance companies had handed several $100 million to the media. I mean, as a starting point for conversation, right? So anyway, that's my.
And that was a great article you wrote on Medicare Advantage versus Medicare, and it was eye-opening to me. And people should check that out. Liz Warren said in an interview that was published today, the Huffington Post, violence is never the answer, but people can only be pushed so far. And she said the visceral response from people across the country who feel cheated, ripped off, and threatened by the vile practice of their insurance company should be a warning to everyone in the healthcare system. And of course, on the right, they're going to make it seem like she's defending violence. She's not. She's talking about the real world organic reaction that's emerged from this. Same thing, Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, our mutual friend, has said some similar stuff about that. I wonder if it will change anything with a Republican administration coming in, controlling the House and the Senate and the White House. Unlikely, but it might make for something for Democrats to talk about in the future, because it is ridiculous the way that we are treated so horribly in our own country by the healthcare companies. There's no need for this. We should have cradle to grave coverage like every other first world nation. It should be built into our system. It should be taken out of your paycheck, however it works, and single payer. So it's not an issue. But now it's almost impossible with the power of these health insurance companies.
And we are the wealthiest of all the first world countries. I mean, you've got country. Stop me if I've told you this story before. Louise and I went down to Costa Rica a couple of years ago with two of my brothers for a family vacation and their families. And we got picked up at the airport by a taxi driver, and he drove us out to the place where we were staying. It's about an hour drive. And on the way, he's telling us the story about how his son just graduated from medical school and he's going to be a doctor. This is a cab driver. And I'm like, wow, that's great. What did it cost? And he's like, oh, it's free. Education's free here in Costa Rica, right up through the MD. Wow. And I'm like, wow, that's great. And, is he going to make a lot of money as a doctor? Well, he'll certainly be in the top 1%. He'll be living really well. He'll make, with the equivalent of a couple $100,000 a year. But, all medical care is free here in Costa Rica, too. So he's not going to get rich because we don't have a privatized healthcare system here. We have a national healthcare system here. And I'm looking around, and it's friggin' Costa Rica, Dean. Costa Rica, people are living in shacks. I mean, this is not the richest country in the world. This is a relatively poor country in a relatively poor part of the world. And they can do this, and we're the richest country in the goddamn world, and we can't do it? What the hell is wrong with us?
I couldn't agree more with Tom, and I'll share my story because it happened last week. We were on vacation in Aruba, and the cab driver, I'm talking to him, and anytime I leave the country, I ask people about their healthcare system. Doesn't matter where I am. I'm always curious. So, how's your healthcare system? He goes, great. He goes, I had a heart attack like a year and a half ago, and they didn't have the necessary stuff to treat me here in Aruba. So they flew me to Colombia, another country, within 45 minutes. I'm on a plane and they treat me there and it's all covered. And I come back here. And Aruba's part of the Netherlands Antilles. So it's part of the Netherlands medical system, which is European based, but they only have the doctors. We went to the emergency room once there a couple of years ago where my fiance wasn't feeling good, and it was Dutch doctors there. They were all, they were working there. They were from the Netherlands and they were doing whatever residence. And they helped her out for a little while. I said, how much do we owe you? And they said, nothing, just go. And I'm like, wow, really? That's it? Because I said to the head, I don't think our insurance is going to cover it, but I hope it's not that expensive, whatever it is. Like, no, nothing. I'm like, you're kidding me. Nothing. And we just,
we had that experience in England 15 years ago. I was giving a speech at King's College, and Louise and our youngest daughter were with us, and she was still a kid then. And this was probably more like 20 years ago. And she got a really bad ear infection. I mean, just screaming, painful ear infection. And so we got back after my speech. We got back to the home that we were staying with. We were staying with the people who sponsored the thing, and they called the surgery. They call them, the doctor's office, and it was like about 3 blocks away. This was 11 o'clock at night. And the doctor answers the phone and he says, and they say, we've got some visitors from the US and their daughter has an ear infection. And, what should we do? And he says, well, I'm about to leave for home, so I'll just stop by on my way home. So he comes over to their house and comes in and he examines Kareth and says, oh, yeah, you got an ear infection, sure enough. And he pulls out his black bag and says, here's some amoxicillin, and, take one of these every 6 hours or whatever it was. And, you'll be fine in the morning, and just don't forget to keep taking it for a week. And I'm like, thank you so much. What do I owe you? And he's like, you don't owe me anything. This is called the national health system, the NHS. We care for people. That's our job. Our job is not making money. Our job is caring for people. And it's like the rest of the world has figured this out. And we would have figured it out a long time ago, but for 2 things. Number one, racism. You and I think when my book on healthcare came out, I think you had me on and we talked about Frederick Hoffman coming from Germany and Prudential back in the 1930s, this whole theory that if you just prevented Black people from getting healthcare because they're genetically inferior, they'll all die out and this will solve the race problem in America. I mean, that was literally right up until the 1960s. The reason why private health insurance companies, private hospitals, private doctors' offices were the choice of Southern conservatives and many all across the country was because they could legally discriminate right up until the 1960s, right up until 1965. And so that's half of the reason. And the other half of the reason, of course, the more contemporary reason is that, in 76, 78, and 2010, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are persons and money is not bribery, it's free speech. And so we've got this insanely corrupt system that's founded on this insanely racist basis that, was literally designed to kill off an entire race of people. And, it's killing us. It's crazy. It's just crazy.
It is. I'm chatting with Thom Hartmann. It doesn't make sense, but we're trying to make sense of it. So let's take a quick break. We're going to return with more with our friend Thom Hartmann right after this. And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. We're continuing our conversation with our buddy Thom Hartmann here. So, Tom, Congressman Mark Alford from Missouri and others, but he got a lot of press because he said he's floating expressly the idea of addressing Medicare and Social Security as part of the cuts. Another Republican senator raised the same thing. It was either Thune or Cornyn. I can't remember which one, but they've always been coming for it, and that's the one thing I want people to realize. Social Security was created by Democrats, Medicare created by Democrats, Medicaid Democrats, ACA Democrats. Republicans have tried to end all of that since the inception of all of them. They opposed them in the beginning. They opposed them in big numbers. We passed them. And since then, they've been working to undermine it. What do you expect Trump and the GOP Congress to do in terms of Social Security? Because one of the proposals already is to put the retirement age. I think that was a senator said that. I don't know if it was Lindsey Graham. I said to 70 years old. But do you think that's an option? What they should do, obviously, is raise the taxes. Like, you can still tax people to a higher level. We've talked about this forever. It's a simple fix, but they won't do that. What do you think they're going to do to Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, the simple reality, and it really does bear repeating over and over and over again, is that if you make over $170,000 a year, you no longer pay taxes into Social Security Trust Fund. And if we simply had people making more than $170,000 paying the exact same percentage as a bus driver, the exact same percentage as the guy working at McDonald's, because literally you are taxed for Social Security from your first penny. This isn't something like income taxes that kicks in at a certain level. If the billionaires, at least working people are taxed on every penny. If millionaires, billionaires, 100,000aires all paid the same percentage that the rest of us pay, there would be no crisis in Social Security. In fact, could give a substantial raise to everybody on Social Security. It would be solvent for the next 75 years. So what's going to happen? Well, Mike Lee put over on X, on Twitter, put a long rant about how Social Security has been a Ponzi scheme all along, and this and that and the other thing, and we need to look at cutting Social Security. And Elon Musk retweeted it. It got something like 80 million views, sort of some amazing number of views. So I fully expect that the Doge or Dodge, I think it's probably, we should call it Dodge instead.
Right.
That's what
Dodgy. We should call it dodgy.
Well, they're trying to dodge the democracy, basically.
Right.
But I fully expect that they will suggest what George W. Bush was leading up to in 2005. Bush, of course, famously privatized Medicare with Medicare Advantage, sometimes called Medicare Part C. He wrote that law, or his administration wrote that law, and it was passed in 2003. And then in 2005, he wanted to come out with Social Security Advantage. I mean, that wasn't the name. In fact, they hadn't come up with a name for it yet. But basically, you have the choice. You can either put your money in Social Security, or you can put a similar amount of money into the stock market. And basically, and in fact, when Reagan first invented IRAs, individual retirement accounts, and then 401ks followed that, these were Republican plans that were put forward over Democratic objection by and large. And the idea was that this was the beginning of the privatization of Social Security. This would get people used to controlling their own money. Used to, and what a lot of people have discovered is that, you don't necessarily make out better that way. And so anyhow, I'm fully expecting that they're gonna be coming out with a program like that, where they're going to say, just like they did with Medicare, over the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to let people come in and they can put their money here instead of there. And what it'll do is it'll drain the Social Security Trust Fund. And just like the Medicare Trust Fund right now is down to 6 years, Medicare is going to be in big trouble in just a few years, largely because of Medicare Advantage, because it costs 6% more than real Medicare does, even though it provides fewer services. And the same thing will happen with Social Security, and they'll just have to shut it down. And if their plan is executed, if the GOP plan is executed, 20 years from now, there will be no Social Security or Medicare.
Really? You think that's really the scenario how this plays out?
Well, I know that's what they want.
They end as we know them, or they end completely. Yeah. They just.
Well, what'll happen is that, right now, only 47% of Americans are on actual Medicare. And, when that number hits 35, and it's heading in that direction right now, I mean, we don't know the numbers actually right now because we just had an enrollment period. So it may be 45, 43, whatever. But when that number hits something like 30, 35%, it's basically no longer sustainable. The system just doesn't have the mass it needs. And B, it no longer has the popular support that would demand that it remain in existence. I mean, if you kill a program that is only beloved and owned and trusted by 30% of the people, you can still win an election. Right. So, I see the same thing happening to Social Security. And frankly, I don't think it'll take take as long, because they've learned their lessons about how to privatize government programs through doing it with Medicare. And we're only 20 years down the road on privatizing Medicare. That started in 2003.
That's a great point. And then look what it's done. It's gone from everybody on it to now. I wasn't aware of the percentage that was on it. And you're right. The lower that goes, the less people are vested in it. They go, well, I have my Medicare Advantage. Just use that, because we're so used to health insurance, not health care, health insurance. Medicare is health care. Medicare Advantage is health insurance, and that's what they want. And the Republicans want that so that they can make more money from their wealthy donors and their executives and the insurance companies, give them more money. Big money, horrifically corrupting. And that's what we're dealing with. And I'm talking with our friend Thom Hartmann. Tom, you had a really good article about the oligarchs already inside the gates. And what do we do now? I mean, it's undeniable. Donald Trump's
Yeah.
got a cabinet of oligarchs, of billionaires, and Elon Musk, the biggest, who's just ostentatious in the use of his money. Do you think there'd be a time where the backlash that happened during the Gilded Age and led to the progressive era and the reforms, are we hopefully on that path, or where do you think this is going to go?
Well, what produced that backlash was the massive greed of the Roaring Twenties, led to this massive inequality, a level that we had never before seen in the United States. In fact, largely never been seen in the developed world. And it just, and the corruption on Wall Street just hit the point where Wall Street crashed in October of 1929, and people got screwed, and people, a third of America lost their jobs, and you had the Republic, what was referred to until the 50s as the Republican Great Depression.
Hmm.
Just kind of wiped people out. I fully expect that if Trump does the things he wants to do, first of all, one of the things that we know, and you can look through history at this, every time Republicans pass a large tax cut, it produces a recession. Every time. So number one, he's going to do his tax cut. That's going to produce a recession. Number two, his tariffs are going to, produce inflation. Sadly, a lot of Joe Biden's programs don't actually kick in until next year. An awful lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of the construction projects. So Trump is going to have a fairly long runway. But he's not going to be able to hold this economy together for 4 years if he's doing the things he's talking about doing. And so that crash that he's going to produce, I mean, Reagan had the worst recession and the biggest stock market crash since the Great Depression. George W. Bush had the worst crash since the Great Depression in 2008. Donald Trump had a crash that was worse than George Bush's crash or Ronald Reagan's crash. So the last three Republican presidents, and I'm not including George Herbert Walker Bush in here because he was just kind of the last 4 years of the Reagan administration. The last three presidential administrations have each produced a really significant crash that in each case led to Democrats taking over afterwards. So I'm actually quite optimistic about 2026 and 2028, assuming that we still have a republic. I'm not optimistic about that. I'm not totally in despair about it, and I'm not ready to light myself on fire. But we've got a hell of a lot of work to do, Dean. We have a big project ahead of us.
We do, and in the recession of the Great Recession, which is the most immediate one we all remember, the speculation of real estate prices and the way they abused it, the banks and making their CDOs and turning to security, all that fuel that. We have a similar thing now, which is cryptocurrencies. And cryptocurrencies are going higher and higher in values. And people don't even have to follow what cryptocurrency is. Just understand that it's not an asset. It's a currency. It's like investing in the US dollar, but the dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of our system. This is not. This is pure speculation. And people are taking speculative money, getting loans against it. They're buying other assets. And I can see that it could be a year, 2 years. I'm not wishing for this, but 3 years being a driving force, which caused another big crash in our system. And going through, I'm reading a book about the 1880s, 1890s, these crashes that happened because of railroad systems or a rope company that was overextended. Literally, they made ropes, Cordigill, and that caused a crash. You're like, how did that? Because people lost confidence in the entire system. Later, there were more laws put into place to protect it, like the Security Exchange Act and FDIC for banks and stuff. But you can see these parallels. Like, it's right in front of us. I'm like, crypto is going to be the next crash, the next cause of a massive crash again. And then we'll learn in the future somehow. I don't know how, but that's probably going to happen during Trump's term, because he's appointed two people who are big crypto guys, including his secretary, not the SEC guy, and another guy who's like a crypto czar. People are going to put all their savings into this, and it's going to collapse. There's nothing to it. There are no assets. It's a currency. It's not a stock. People think it's a stock.
Not even a currency. It's not even
a made-up currency. Like, it's literally made up. It's not a fiat currency. It's made up.
It's the product of a mathematical equation. It's like a digital painting or something. The analogy that comes to my mind when I think of crypto is the Dutch tulip bulbs in the 1700s. That was they were used as a currency. because there was not a lot of trust at that time in the Dutch currency. And people were bidding these tulip bulbs up to the point where it was just crazy. I mean, you could buy a house with a handful of tulip bulbs, and then boom, the whole thing collapsed. And it wasn't the really rich people that it took down. I mean, they lost a little bit, but it was the average people who had gotten in on the stampede. And that's the thing. I mean, you look at both panics and panics would be the downside. What would you call the upside, where everybody piles in and wants to bid something up? Excitements or something. There's got to be a word for it, but you know what I'm talking about. Frenzies.
Sure.
And when the public comes in, that's when the wealthy people look around and say, this is now the time to get out. Gloria Swanson was an old friend of mine, and she was on the board of this children's home that Louise and I started. And I used to go down to New York, and we'd have dinner together in her apartment. She'd been a vegetarian her whole life, and I was a vegetarian. So anyway, she told me this story one time about, Jack Kennedy had just ripped her off terribly, and she hated him. But he was also her manager for a while, and they had this long affair that was kind of famous. And she told me how he had told her that the reason he got out of the stock market in 1929, he got out of the market about a month before the crash. And the reason that he got out of the market was because the shoeshine boy who was taking care of him was in the market. And he said, when the shoeshine boy is in the market, then all the middle class money is in the market now. Now's the time to get out, because this will not last. And he was spot on right. I mean, and I've read that story elsewhere that that apparently Kennedy liked to tell that story.
Interesting.
But here we are. It's like the average person is starting to look at getting into crypto, especially now that there are basically like ETFs, crypto ETFs.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I don't think it's gonna, because like you said, there is no basis for it. I believe this is one of the reasons why they're so gung ho to create the equivalent of the FDIC for crypto.
Yeah.
They will back the currency, so that when that crash happens, the federal government will have to bail them out.
No, that's exactly it. They're right. The Republicans hate regulation, but they want regulation here to give it legitimacy. So people can go like, okay, I can put my hard-earned savings that I put in the savings I've worked so many years, I'm going to put it in there because my friends are getting rich. And you read about crypto millionaires going on. And by the way, Doge, in case you don't know, DOGE, that's a fake crypto. That's not a fake. It's a cryptocurrency that Elon Musk created. He came up with Dogecoin. And so that's why he's named his Department of Government Efficiency. It's just a way to advertise that crypto thing that he came up with literally as a joke. I remember when it happened. I'm like, who's going to invest in this? Now it's one of the actual cryptos that people invest in. I'm like, what is wrong with you? What's wrong? It's a pyramid scheme, everybody. So get out. And you're absolutely right. When I saw when I said Bitcoin go over $100,000, I'm like, people are about to get hurt. And the Doge coin, that the Department of Government Efficiency is something that Elon for fun hyped up this cryptocurrency Doge, which someone created that really seemed like a joke. It was like, I remember when this thing happened. I'm like, I can't believe people are going to invest in it. And sure enough, and here is where we are. I mean, we're in a precarious place, Thom, in so many ways, our democracy and our economy. And, you've written so much about the history of the oligarchs and what goes on. If we hit a crash and really people are suffering in the middle class, I wonder if it makes them more ripe to accept a fascist or the end of democracy. If Trump can promise them something, even though he's the head of it now, and he owns everything after January 20th at noon, everything he owns, and we're going to make him own it. I mean, does that concern you that if we really did an economic crash, that it's more ripe for the end of our republic?
Well, that's one of the great lessons of history. I mean, that's what Hitler took advantage of. It's what Mussolini took advantage of. Republicans would tell you that that's what FDR took advantage of, and he did. I mean, I was playing an FDR clip today where he was talking about, Republicans would have you think that I eat millionaires for breakfast. Actually, I like scrambled eggs, and he had another one. He says, my wealthy friends tell me that if I am reelected, this was in 36. If I am reelected, they will have to leave the country because I'm going to increase taxes even higher, which he did, by the way. And he says, he pauses for a moment. He says, I will miss them very much. And I mean, he just took it to them. And that's what we need right now in the Democratic Party. We need somebody who is willing to take it to them. We need somebody who's willing to stand up to them. We need somebody who's willing to tell the radical truths that need to be told, whether it's about the craziness of having a government agency back cryptocurrencies, or whether it's the insanity of having a Russian agent running our intelligence services, or an alleged Russian agent. Et cetera. I mean, I don't need to go through the whole list, but you got it.
Look, it's going to be remarkable. And it goes back to the way we started this conversation as we wrap up here, that Democrats need to step up. There's a void. There's a vacuum right now of leadership, and Trump is filling it all. And they might have some rope-a-dope strategy like Muhammad Ali. Let him do all this stuff, and then we'll come in and win at the end. But this is a unique time. I wouldn't do rope-a-dope now. I would punch for punch right now to remind people what the stakes are. And then when it crashes, to make it clear, this is all on Trump. And that's what concerns me, and getting a populist message like you're talking about is so vitally important. Resistance 2.0 has to include policy, not just resisting Trump, but policy, and the idea of a populist plan going forward where Liz Warren, Bernie Sanders talk about it. I want to see other Democrats. I want them in one voice to talk about it. That's what kills me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there, which brings us back to where we started, which is, where is Joe Biden? Where is Kamala Harris? Why isn't Chuck Schumer speaking out? What does Hakeem Jeffries have to say? We need to hear from the leadership of the Democratic Party. We need to hear from them now.
We do. We need Chuck Schumer to take an improv class. I've been yelling forever. Chuck, you live in New York. There's improv, UCB theaters here. Dude, take an acting class, something. Bring it to life. You can't give a speech where he reads it. It's like some third grade substitute teacher reading stuff. Well, Thom, thanks for being on again. Your Substack's HartmannReport.com.